Hello, this is the Disaster Recovery Pro, and this is my video series discussing key topics in information technology with a focus on disaster recovery and business continuity. In today's presentation, we're going to take a look at the risk assessment process. We'll define what it is and take a look at how it fits into the overall framework of a business continuity program. The risk assessment is one of the foundational practices you'll use to build your business continuity and disaster recovery programs. It's usually one of the first phases or major projects that you take after defining your goals and objectives for your business continuity program during program initiation. The output of the risk assessment phase is going to be used by later phases in the business continuity process as input, particularly for the business impact analysis phase, which will use the risk assessment to help determine priorities and scope of recovery, which will in turn serve to define the requirements for business continuity and disaster recovery strategy formation. The goals of the risk analysis phase are to identify risks that can have an adverse effect on a business entity's resources and/or image. In other words, identify threats to the people, processes, and technology that make up your business entity, as well as threats to your business's public image or industry reputation. The risk assessment should assess those risks to determine their potential impacts, whether it's monetary impact or reputation impact, and allow the business entity to determine the best way to reduce, mitigate, or recover from those impacts. We're not talking about hard recovery strategy at this stage, but we should be looking at what the business is currently doing to avoid or mitigate risks and make best practice recommendations to improve risk mitigation. The content of the actual risk assessment is usually divided up into three main categories. First, you'll determine and define what your risk exposures are. Then determine the probability and severity of each of those risks. And finally, evaluate controls and mitigation strategies, both ones that are in place and ones that are being considered for each risk. Risk exposures can cover a broad range of possibilities. Your risk exposures can include things like natural phenomena, that's fires, hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, anything along those lines. You can have technological exposures such as failures in equipment or services, and cybersecurity risks such as information theft and privacy violations, or more direct cyber attacks such as denial of service or ransomware attacks. There are human acts, both internal and external, things like workplace violence or sabotage, and things like lawsuits, civil unrest, or even negative press coverage. Or you could have industry or business model related exposures such as disruptions to your supply chain, disruptions to your distribution model, or unexpected shifts in the markets, things like a stock market crash or just a sudden change in technology or customer perception that impacts your current business model, including things like stock market crashes or harmful stock manipulation. Once you've determined what risk exposures you're going to address, you're going to need to go down that list and for each risk, determine how likely it is for each risk to happen, and try to quantify in financial terms what the severity of the impact is if that risk actually occurs. Qualitative impacts that you can't really put a hard financial number to should also be documented here so it can play into decision making surrounding those risks. This part is really important for making business decisions around business continuity because that equation of probability times financial impact compared to the cost of a potential solution is going to be critically important in determining recovery strategies and formulating your recovery priorities and order of operations. When you evaluate controls and mitigation, you're going to be taking a look at what controls or resilience strategies currently exist in the organization. These are measures that reduce the probability or the severity of a given risk exposure. These are things like physical and technological security measures, things like fire prevention or flood mitigation controls, and even things like insurance coverage or legal protections. You want to evaluate the effectiveness of each of those controls and resilience strategies, That is, put a number to how much you're reducing the probability or reducing the financial exposure, and also documenting any qualitative effects that you really can't put a number to as well. And finally, you'll want to do a gap analysis on those controls and mitigations, where you make best practice recommendations on how to improve those controls and resilience strategies, and identify areas where you can add additional controls and resilience strategies. Here we can get an idea for how the risk assessment can feed into your business impact analysis process. Knowing your risk exposures and what their probability and severity are can feed directly into the ability of the business impact analysis to determine the scope of your recovery plans and prioritize the recovery of your business functions. Understanding your controls and risk mitigation strategies also plays into that prioritization process and strongly influences the gap analysis that's going to occur at the business impact analysis level, especially considering that the more current popular disaster recovery strategies center more around resilience and avoiding disasters rather than recovering from them. You can see how understanding your controls and mitigation would be very important for doing a gap analysis that's centered more on your ability to recover than on your ability to control. And I would even go so far to say that as the technology and business practices of disaster recovery continue to advance, that line between mitigation strategy and recovery strategy is just going to continue to blur. So mitigation and resilience, which is normally in the scope of the risk analysis, is going to kind of cross over a lot more with the gap analysis of recovery capabilities that's normally part of the business impact analysis. So while today those two gap analyses are kind of handled in separate silos, I would expect that that's going to evolve a great deal in the next, say, 5 to 10 years. So let's summarize some closing thoughts about the risk assessment phase of business continuity practice. Risk assessment is one of the 10 business continuity professional practices as defined by the Disaster Recovery Institute International. As such, it's one of the foundations of any business continuity program. At a very high level, the risk assessment determines what the potential threats to your business are, what their probability is, and what their impact is. The risk assessment also examines strategies to reduce the probability and severity of any identified risk exposures and makes best practice recommendations for improvements to or additions to existing controls. The output of the risk assessment informs decisions made during business impact analysis and, in turn, recovery strategy definition. And finally, the risk assessment needs to be an ongoing practice. Your risk assessment should be updated at least yearly, or more ideally on a continuous basis. Thanks for watching today's presentation. If you found this topic interesting and you want to learn more about disaster recovery and business continuity, you can help support the channel by leaving a comment to tell me what you thought about it, clicking like on the video, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so that you won't miss out on my next video. Your support and feedback is very important, so thank you for watching and supporting the channel, and have a great day.